Women's Six Nations fantasy game is now live, and if you want to fly up the fantasy rankings but don't know where to start, then you're in the right place. Whether you're a seasoned fantasy rugby player or brand new to the game, this guide will walk you through everything you need to know: scoring, transfers, captaincy, and the best strategies to get ahead. Thousands and thousands of people are signing up for the Women's Six Nations fantasy game, but most will make mistakes. Stick around and we'll make sure that you aren't one of them. By the end of this video, you'll have a rock solid strategy, a competitive squad, and an edge over all of your mini league rivals. So let's dive straight in. So first up, the game and how you play it. If you know what you're doing, then you can probably skip past this bit. And if you play the Men's Six Nations, then you'll be very familiar with the format. But make sure you stick around for some insights from last year's Women's Six Nations game to give you an extra edge. The game is live at fantasy.sixnationsrugby.com/W6N. Once you're in, you've got a budget of 230 stars to build a squad of 15 starters and one player on your bench. You can select any player named in the Women's Six Nations squads. However, each player has a different price, so you need to manage your budget wisely and work to identify the value players. Your team must consist of 3 back 3 players, 2 centres, 1 fly half, 1 scrum half, 3 back rows, 2 second rows, 2 props and a hooker, while your bench player can be from any position at all. Keep an eye out for out of position players too. Often you have players who play in multiple positions, so they might be categorised as a centre but be playing on the wing. For example, like Sydney Gregson and Marie Menager last season. It's also important to note that you can only select a maximum of 4 players from the same country. In addition, for each round, you're going to have 2 bonus chips that you can assign to your selection. These are the captain and the super sub. These will be familiar to those who have played the game before, but for the uninitiated, the player you select as a captain will have their points doubled, while the player you select as a super sub will have their points trebled. With the super sub, you must select a player who's beginning the match on the bench, and if you select a starter in the super sub position, you're only going to get half of their points. There are strategies to the super sub selection, but more on that later in the video. Points are awarded for tries. That's 15 points for forwards and 10 points for back. A slight tweak from last year's Six Nations game. Try assists are worth 4 points, conversions are worth 2 points, penalties are worth 3 points, drop goals are worth 5 points, defenders beaten 2 points, carried meters is 1 point per 10 meters made, and 50-22s are worth 7 points. While on the defensive side, points are awarded for tackles, breakdown steals 5 points, line out steals 7 points, and finally there's a massive 15 points on offer for the official Women's Six Nations player of the match, so choose carefully. You're also going to need to be careful if you have players prone to disciplinary issues, as there are points deductions in place for conceded penalties, that's -1 point, yellow cards -5 points, and red cards -8 points. There are also a couple of new scoring metrics for this year's game, which again were in place for the Men's Six Nations game. Firstly, offloads are now worth 2 points, and also all the team's forwards on the pitch will get a point each when they win their own scrum. Some great prizes are on offer for the overall leaders of each round and for the overall winner. In fact, the overall winner will get an amazing prize of 2 tickets to a 2026 Women's Six Nations game of their choice, including return flights, 2 nights in a hotel in the host city of the game, 2 passes for a tourism experience in the host city of the game, and also a voucher for £200 or €200, depending on where you live. The Women's Six Nations is a short tournament with just 5 rounds, so it's crucial that you get off to a good start. So here are 5 initial tips to help build your team to give you the best shot from the start. Firstly, above all, it's key that you hold off finalising your team until all the starting lineups are announced. It's definitely a good thing to build some drafts before the tournament to make sure you know the player pool and the prices, but don't finalise your team until you know everyone playing. In addition, occasionally a player will suffer an injury between the announcement and kickoff. For example, like last year, Rosie Gallagher being announced out just 10 minutes before kickoff in last year's England versus Ireland game, which caught a lot of people out. So keep a close eye on the team news and be ready for any switches needed. Next up, don't feel bound to make a limited number of transfers. Unlike other games, the Six Nations fantasy game allows you to completely tear up your team for no points penalty between rounds. This means you can just load your team for each round. If you need to make 15 changes, then don't hold back, just do it. The official game is a salary cap game, so how you allocate your budget is key. One key point to note is that players' values go up and down throughout the tournament based on their performance, so you can build your team's maximum value throughout the tournament. This can be a massive help when it comes to the closing couple of rounds of the tournament, so make your transfers wisely. Play the market. Each player's value will evolve, increasing or decreasing according to their real performance. This means that you'll make a profit or a loss after each round. Another big tip is around kickers. Very often in fantasy rugby games, you have to select one kicker to gain points from conversions, penalties, drop goals, etc. Not here. So if you can find the kickers who play outside of the fly half position, then they're well worth picking up as they're guaranteed kicking points. Some examples of the women's game, this includes Langi Tuwima or Emma Singh. There are quite a few options there who kick outside the normal fly half position. Finally, have a strategy for your super sub, which can be an absolute game changer. You can get lucky with your super sub. For example, if one of the starting 15 needs to go off in the early stages of the game, but otherwise you could be at the mercy of a coach who decides to leave their backs on the bench for the entire 80 minutes. So you had to play the percentages and consider the risks. For me, there are three key areas to consider in a super sub. Firstly, will they come on and will they play a significant period of time? For this, we see props, hookers and scrum halves tend to come on typically between the 45th and 60th minute of the game. So they usually get some good game time, and hookers often find themselves on the end of the driving maul, and so they bring an added try threat. With locks and back rows, it's not rare to see a starting lock or back row play the full 80. That said, the lock and back row bench options are not typically left on the bench either, so they're a good option too. Fly halves are a bit more unpredictable. They could come on early if the game plan is not working, but likewise, sometimes a change is just too disruptive and can be left late, or in some cases not at all. And centres and back threes tend to also be a bit of a lottery. Next up, take a look at previous games to see if there are any trends on how the team operates their replacements. In some cases, past matches can provide a pretty educated insight into how a team will play their bench. Finally, is your prospective super sub the only option on the bench in their position? If a team's playing a 6-2 split on the bench, for example, then it's probably a good time to select a utility back, as they're far more likely to come on in time to make a decent impact. For me, when it comes to the super sub for the Women's Six Nations fantasy game, I'm generally looking at either players in the back row or the hooker position. Last year, Connie Powell and Cleena Maloney were brilliant super sub choices. Powell delivered consistently off the bench throughout, and once she was reinstated to the Ireland squad, Maloney also had 2 great weeks off the bench. So good luck. With triple points on offer, a successful super sub pick can propel you to the very top. Okay, want a few more tips? These were 3 of the biggest lessons I took away from the 2024 game, all of which I included in an article on the Women's Six Nations site last year called Fantasy Rugby Lessons for 2025. Lesson number 1, always captain Kildun. By round 5, it was something that we were all acutely aware of, but if you needed any convincing, Ellie Kildun last season proved to be the ultimate set it and forget it captain option in the game. A quick reminder of her achievements in last year's game. She was the highest scoring player in the fantasy game with 303 points. She was the recipient of the highest single fantasy score in one round, which was 126 points. She was the recipient of the highest number of Player of the Match awards in 3. She was the top try scorer in the Women's Six Nations tournament with 9 tries over the whole championship. She had the highest meters carried over the whole championship as well, 866 meters in 5 games. And she had the highest number of defenders beaten, 29. You get the idea, but this is just scraping the surface of her achievements in 2024. If she's fit and available in 2025, then Ellie Kildun is just a no-brainer for your captain. Lesson number 2, don't just look to tries for points. When selecting a fantasy team, the temptation is always to go with the high try scorers, but there's huge fantasy points potential in the players that deliver some of the more unsung jobs on the field. Those who regularly deliver breakdown steals, line-out steals, and tackles always bring the high scores. You only have to look at the likes of Alex Callender, who had the highest number of tackles in the tournament with 74 and an average fantasy score per round of 27.4, or Zoe Aldcroft, who had the second highest number of line-out steals with 5 and an average fantasy score of 33.8, and Evie Gallagher, who had the highest number of breakdown steals with 7 and an average fantasy score of 27.2. This year, look to more than just the try scorers for your fantasy points. Lesson number 3, prioritise back rows, centres and back threes. Looking at the average scores by position, certain positions seem to score higher than others. This has big implications as where you should invest your stars and who to select as your captain. The most consistent high scorers last year could be found in the back row, centre and back three positions. Looking at players who made 4 or more appearances, 7 back rowers scored on average over 25 points. 4 centres averaged 25 or more, while a trio of back three players scored 25 or more per match on average. On the flip side, there were no fly halves, scrum halves or props playing 4 matches or more who averaged over 25 points. Hooker and second row saw some outliers in Zoe Aldcroft and Vittoria Vecchini, but apart from these two, there was nobody else in this position averaging over 25 points. From this, we can establish that the safest captain route is via the back row, the centre, or the back three. So that should be enough to get you started. Throughout the Women's Six Nations, I'll be sharing insights and strategies to help you climb the leaderboard and earn ultimate bragging rights in your mini leagues. Both here on the YouTube channel, so please like and subscribe, and also at fantasyrugbygeek.com, where I'll be posting my usual weekly tips and players to watch. I'll also be sharing up-to-the-minute fantasy news on X, Blue Sky, Threads, TikTok and Instagram. And if you want an extra edge, I have my members-only site, FRG Premium, on buymeacoffee.com. For £10 a month subscription, you'll be able to see my personal team reveals, not just for the Women's Six Nations, but also for Prem, URC and others, as well as the last round of the Men's Six Nations if you sign up by the 14th of March. You'll be able to share your team with me for direct feedback on any changes that I recommend, so please sign up. There's a link in my description. So that's it. Get signed up to the fantasy game, subscribe to my channel and get picking. And if you have any questions at all, just let me know in the comments.